Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining My Word Publishing. We are going, well, we're not going live anymore, but we are talking with Sara Glancy. She's a public speaking coach, and she has so much to share with us about how to really hone in on our public speaking skills and really get out of our heads. I think a lot of writers are, really, we're in the books, we're on the ground doing the writing, and we're picking and choosing our words. So we really want to get out of our own heads, take the stages, and really share what we're passionate about. So I'm so excited for you to be here with us and to really give us the tools and tips and tricks that I think a lot of authors are really looking forward to. So thanks for joining today.
Thank you for having me. I love public speaking and I love authors. They are fellow lovers of words. So I could not be more pleased to be speaking to your people, whether we are live or just a little post live.
Yes, exactly. And, as a self-publishing consultant, working with authors through producing their books, getting them to publishing, I have found time and time again, the part that every author really hates is the book marketing part, which really is kind of self-promotion, right? And like talking about ourselves. And so I really feel like that kind of goes hand in hand too with public speaking and really like putting ourselves out there and on the line. There's so many nerves, performance anxiety. So I really just want to like dive in and I think, I really want to start with how did you get started in this space and what was like your first memory as maybe then as a child or as an adult having that performance anxiety and like what did you do?
Okay, I love that. So my origin story, my background is actually in theater. So I bring a lot of theater training and playwriting to the work that I do with folks around public speaking and storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And let me tell you, if you feel like you get nervous when you step up to a podium to introduce yourself, imagine doing that, but in a leotard. And that is the theater background that I come from, is auditioning. And there's this common misperception or misconception rather, that all actors are extroverts and they love being in the spotlight. And that is not true. I am naturally an introvert and I actually get a little bit nervous speaking in public. So I'm an actor and a public speaking coach, and I'm here to say it is perfectly normal to get nervous before speaking in public. So I had to learn how to tamp down my own performance anxiety in the context of singing a song, doing a monologue, doing all of the things that scare us about public speaking, but in a leotard. So that was my trial by fire that I try to bring to the clients that I work with who are outside of the acting world.
Oh my God, I love that. And yeah, all of us that we all have that, nerves. I even identify as an introvert, all these writers and authors. I think the majority of us are introverts, unless maybe you're a business owner. And I think naturally they are always advocating and talking, speaking about their business. But for maybe the memoir, the fiction writers, those we do craft our stories, but it's then how do we get on that stage and talk about them and talk about them passionately. So I know you mentioned storytelling as part of your jumping off point of how to help them. So can you tell me a little bit more about that and why is that important?
Absolutely. And this is a strength that I think authors need to recognize they already have. You already have a leg up from a lot of other folks that are doing public speaking because you're already a storyteller. So I always say that to the authors that I work with who are introverts, and they go, I'm used to writing things down. I don't want to step in front of the microphone. That's not me. You're already have a leg up because you know how to craft a story. And as a self-published author, because you're already your own marketing team, stories are really useful in a business context. So we know how powerful they can be from an artistic perspective, but something that we don't always think about is that old adage that you may have heard if you ever took a business class: we buy from brands that we know, like, and trust.
Right.
And storytelling, there have been studies shown that when you hear a really great story, your brain releases oxytocin, which is one of those feel-good drugs that promotes trust and bonding. So one of the fastest ways that you can build trust with a client, with an audience, is to tell them a story. So that's why personal storytelling, being willing to let yourself be the center of attention, which can be really uncomfortable for authors, it's a really powerful tool in marketing because it's part of your brand and people buy from brands that they know, like, and trust. And part of that is being able to tell your own personal story and weave personal narrative.
Right. So when it comes to folks who are like fiction writers, right, and they're naturally like writing their their fiction stories. So when they're taking the stage, are you saying that they should really be storytelling about themselves, or is it a story on the story? So
A story on the story.
yeah,
Yeah, this is a great place to zoom back. And the first question I always ask folks when they're speaking in public, regardless of industry, is, okay, going into the speaking event, what do you want your audience to do or feel as a result? Because even though you are the person in the spotlight, and that can be very uncomfortable, your attention is still on your audience. What do you want them to do or feel? And that's going to vary a lot, speaking engagement to speaking engagement. If you're doing a reading of your book, maybe, then what you're focusing on is you want to really get buy-in around the story. You want to get people excited about this thing that you've created. And that's going to be slightly different than if you're pitching to an editor, maybe. Well, though the goal is the same. You want them to get buy-in around your idea, your elevator pitch. So like zooming back, the first question is, what do you want the audience to do or feel? What is the objective? So the focus isn't entirely on you. It's about your audience and the work that you're really promoting in the spotlight.
Mm-hmm. And and you kind of gave me a flashback, so I have to share it with you. So I'm a writer. I like to write poetry, and when I was kind of building up my poetry community and trying to promote myself, I was like, okay, very nervous to begin with, but I would say, oh, maybe I should read one of my poems, and do an Instagram live or just video it and throw it, and now I'm out there, like,
I love that.
Every time I would do that, though, I'd be nervous, and I still get so nervous sharing my poetry. So I guess, is it, practice makes perfect? Is that the, is that the tip? Or is like, how do we, because in the moment you can feel it in your whole body, like that nervousness, and your voice shakes. Personally, I get all red. So like, how do we in that moment deal with that nervousness?
That is such a good question. And I would say practice makes progress. It's never going to be perfect. So we got to let go of that. I especially have to reiterate that with my authors, because I think that's one of the things that causes anxiety is when I'm writing it down, I can get it word perfect. I can have a final draft. And when you're doing public speaking, there's going to be likes, there's going to be there's going to be moments when your brain goes blank for a second. And that's part of the process, right? We can't go back and edit it. Right. So first, with that caveat, how do we deal with performance anxiety? One, recognize that it's just a physiological thing happening to your body. And then I love that you gave me some examples of like, my face gets red, this happens. I think the first thing to know when you're dealing with performance anxiety is, what are the physical symptoms that you get? Because the solution is going to vary person to person based on how performance anxiety hits you. I know for me, my number one tell that I'm nervous is I speed up. And I'm already a fast talker. I'm a New Yorker, so that can get kind of lethal pretty fast. Yeah. So for me, knowing that that's my number one tick when I get nervous, I make sure in the 2 minutes before I turn on a camera, even for a low stress conversation like this one that I'm having with you right now, I always do 2 minutes of breath work, because that's what slows my heart rate down. And I know the motor mouth happens when my heart rate gets elevated. So if you're like me and you speed up when you get nervous, I would say do a few rounds of asymmetrical breathing. And that's breathing in for a count of 4 and out for a count of 6. Lengthening your exhale for longer than the inhale is a really good way to calm the nervous system down. I always say, look, we can try to think our way out of performance anxiety. We can have mantras. We can do all of that good stuff. I'm a big believer in what is the 20% effort that's going to yield 80% of results. And if we know that performance anxiety is a physiological process that's happening, let's deal with the symptom first. Or for my friends, and I would love to, since I know we'll post this later, let us know in the comments, how does performance anxiety hit you? Because there's a different fix depending. For my friends who get tongue-tied, I know that's a big one that happens. Usually that's one, the heart rate is up, so some breath work can help. It can also just mean that when you get in fight or flight, a lot of our muscles tense up, and that can affect the muscles around our jaw and tongue. So we're literally getting tongue-tied because we've got some fight or flight happening in those muscles. So you can take 30 seconds and stretch out your jaw, and that's going to take care of a lot of the physical symptoms right off the bat. You know, I'm all about an easy fix when one exists.
Love that. I know one tip I heard a long time ago, and I started using this back in high school, was like you have to make yourself feel really big, or like, and again, it's just another, physiological, right? It's like another physical thing to do for yourself. It's so interesting. It's like you actually have to get physical, maybe even to get out of the mental a bit,
And especially for my cerebral folks, like my authors, if you can start with the body, our tendency is we want to think our way out of the problem. Sometimes there's an easier physical solution. And I love that you mentioned the making yourself big. Probably folks have seen the TED Talk, the power poses.
Yeah.
So just what that is doing is it's getting us out of startle posture. Startle posture is what happens. Again, we talked about how performance anxiety is, we're getting some adrenaline, racing heart, all of these things. It's because our body is in fight or flight. Even though we're just speaking to a camera or to an audience, our body thinks that we are somehow under attack. And so our body is trying to do things to protect us. One of the things it does is our shoulders raise up and we tend to cross our arms. And the reason we're doing this is because subconsciously we think something is going to attack our neck or our squishy internal organs. So if you notice that when you get nervous that the shoulders go up and we cross our arms, that's because your body thinks there's a threat present.
Wow.
So if you want to trick your body into thinking there is not a threat present, one of the best things you can do is just find your feet on the floor, roll your shoulders down and back, right? And keep your hands at your side. This is a nice open, neutral posture. It's going to signal to your audience that you are not uncomfortable or intimidated, and also that you're open to listening. It's a non-defensive posture. So again, if you're feeling a little nervous, do your checklist. Am I breathing deeply? Very simply, what happens if I put my hands down by my side and get out of startle posture? Just keep it simple.
I love that. And also my mind goes like, worst case scenario, you're in the middle of like a speaking event. And like you said, one of those things that happens is like, just you're completely, all your thoughts fall out of your head. And you're like, oh, like, how do people, I mean, luckily I feel like I haven't been on a big stage and that's happened to me, but I'm sure, and I've watched some of my favorite podcasters. They've said like, I've been on big stages and I just completely lose my thought. And honestly, it feels great to hear that. Cause like, okay, we're all human and they're like big stars. So what do they do? What are they doing maybe to get back on track? What do you suggest?
Yeah. So step one, we want to make it less likely that it's going to happen to us. And part of that is doing the prep that we talked about of like shoulders down, arm by the side, breathing. Breathing is the most important thing here. Usually when folks forget their thoughts or when they feel stumped during a Q&A, this happens a lot too. You'll notice people start holding their breath. They lose the thought and then they go, thinking that will somehow help us arrive at the thought. It doesn't. One of a fun fact for my word nerds out there, which I'm sure there are many since this is an authors group.
Yep.
One of the other definitions for inspiration, other than the kind that we normally use, is inhalation. So I always say you can't get inspired if you're not breathing.
Right.
When we hold our breath, we make it way less likely that the thought is going to come to us. So I think one, making peace with the idea that sometimes the thought is going to escape you. In that moment, can you challenge yourself to not hold your breath and panic? Because the panic is where we really lose track and we've lost the entire slide deck. Whereas if we just go, I lost my thought. Oh, right. I was about to talk about performance anxiety. It's amazing how quickly the thought will come back to you if you can just take one full breath. And I know that's easier said than done.
Yeah, because I know for myself, if I get that, if it's lost in my head, then, and you're not, and right, maybe I don't even realize that I stop breathing. And then you're like, now you're fixating on the fact that you forgot it. And it's like, it's just exponential, the freak out that happens.
Yes. So, and this is where I say, one, we want to set ourselves up for success of if we're breathing deeply, we're less likely to have it happen. In the moment where it does happen, here's our mental checklist. First, can I take a breath? It is also fine to have some cheats of, if I lose my place, what I'm going to do is, one moment, I'm going to take a sip of water. Buy yourself time. It's okay. And honestly, presentations need more pauses. People need time to metabolize the information that they're giving to them. So have a fail-safe, have a glass of water next to you. And if you lose your place, you're going to take a breath. You're going to take a sip of water. You're going to return to the presentation, right? I think sometimes it helps when we're catastrophizing, like, what is the actual worst case scenario? The worst case scenario is I go, one moment, I just need to check my notes. Oh, right. Okay. Here's where we're going.
Right. And
the worst case is usually not that bad.
because I know, and almost to bring in that storytelling piece here a little bit too. So when you work with authors or clients and you're helping them build their story, right? Or what they're gonna share. And I'm sure they have maybe some like, just a beginning, middle, end, you know how to start, you know where you're gonna go, maybe you know where you're ending. So just in case, I don't know, if I jump over there and I forgot to get to the other island, how do they navigate that? And maybe how do you help them, like, just in case, is anything built into that storytelling model to help them, land nicely, softly?
I love that you actually said that. This is something I talk with my clients about all the time. And I have a free resource that I'll link when we put this up called Mesmerize, Don't Memorize, which
Okay.
is basically how I outline talks, whether your talk is 5 minutes long or a 90-minute keynote. I'm a big believer in not memorizing things. I think memorization tends to get us more nervous. And when that moment happens of if you've decided there's a very specific way that you need to say this thing, once you forget it, that's when the panic comes in. Whereas when you have an outline like what you just laid out of, I know the beginning, middle, and end, then we have some room to flow between. And actually, you said it beautifully when you're like a soft landing place. I always say, no matter what, you want to stick the landing. So if you're going to memorize one thing in your entire speech, memorize the last sentence, because that's what we remember the most. We'll forgive a little meandering in the middle. And I always say, find a soft place to land, stick the landing like a gymnast. So even if you stumble, you're still going to do that thing where you throw your arms in the air and go, yes, I nailed it. So exactly what you said, an outlining process of know where you're starting, know where you're ending, knowing some key points in the middle, not usually more than 5 bullet points, and then just really feel confident. I know where I'm going to land. So if I meander a little in the middle, it's okay because I know what I'm aiming for.
Where do you feel, I just was thinking about that confidence. Where do you feel that people, like, if they do this thing, it'll make them more confident? So do you feel like their confidence stems from they know their story, they know where they're going, or is it more they practiced enough and now they have like, in your experience, do you feel like it's one or the other, or it's really a combined that you've seen the most, I don't know, the best results from? I'm curious, like, where does true confidence come from? Is it like somebody feels so confident in their story and that helps, or is it they do it so much and then over time get that confidence?
Confidence does come in different forms. I think the most reliable form of confidence is confidence in your process. Because I've worked with a lot of folks who go like, I don't get any nerves as long as I have enough time to practice. And that's great, but that's not necessarily scalable. Because maybe in the beginning, you're like, I do one speaking event a quarter. I can really practice hours and hours and hours. But then the more in the spotlight you are, the more you're going to be asked to do things. And the more you'll be asked to do them on short notice. Right. So I would say more so than knowing your story down pat. And there are 1 or 2 stories you'll probably repurpose for many speaking events. Big believer in that. I think true confidence comes from, I have a process that I can trust. I know the exact steps that I need to take to feel confident in a talk, whether I have 3 months to prepare or whether I have 5 minutes. I think that's where true confidence comes, because we want to know that we're going to do well if we're thrown a curveball. If suddenly we're not on Facebook Live, we're on Zoom, right. Or if your slide deck doesn't work, these curveballs are going to come up. Also, one of the best ways to build that resilience, I always say, take an improv class, because things are going to go wrong. So I think one of the best skills we can cultivate is how do we just like laugh and breathe through it when things do.
I love that. And I have to ask, are you like rock solid confident now? Like you never shake, or are you, like us, or you're like, no, I still need to work on all this?
Amanda, I told you I had to do my breathing exercises before we got on this Zoom. And even for phone calls, I do my breathing exercises. Because that's the thing is confidence, I think, is knowing what to do to get the best result for yourself. And knowing how to work in spite of performance anxiety, not how to get rid of it completely. I teach people how to cohabitate with performance anxiety, because it's a physiological thing. And it feels very similar to excitement. So going into a talk, I'm like, I don't know, my heart's racing. There's bubbly stuff going on. Am I anxious? Am I excited? Probably both.
Right.
The important thing is, can I coexist with those feelings and deliver my message effectively?
I love that. Yeah, it's one of those things where we just have to continue to move through it. And it's interesting too. It's like, well, maybe some, like, let's say we're going on Facebook Live today, maybe that makes us nervous, or maybe it doesn't, but maybe a big speaking gig does. But honing that process, continuing to practice the process, maybe will actually maybe that'll give us the best results, which is interesting. Because so despite your nervousness, if it comes that day or it doesn't, maybe continue with your process, like almost a ritual sort of.
Yes, that's exactly it, is knowing, because there may be days where I go, I feel completely calm. I don't need to do my breathing exercises. And then halfway through the presentation, the slide deck goes down and the tech fails or this or that happens.
Right.
Don't, I always say, like, do an assessment day of like, how am I feeling? What's going on in my body? And if you're particularly nervous, maybe do a longer warm up. If you're feeling pretty calm, just do your 2-minute go-tos, but be confident in the process. No, this is what works for me. And this will work for me if everything goes smoothly. And it will work for me if everything goes out the window, which also happens because it's life, right?
And one of the things that I really wanted to share with you today too is like my personal interest in speaking has just been more recently, I think, as a business owner, somebody like for professional development purposes. So I don't really have anything booked. I'm not selling a book, but I just always have admired speaking as a skill, and it's twofold. I think it's awesome as a person to hone that skill and feel that confidence and get on stage, but then the other part of the skill is the impact and the influence. And I wanted to ask you a little bit today too, so I feel like we've been talking about ourselves and getting us ready to speak, but also on that other side of the speaking of public speaking is like bringing in that impact and the influence. So what would you advise us to, like, how can we best impact our audiences? Is there, I don't know, is there a special secret sauce that you can share with us?
I wish there was a special secret sauce. My special, ooh, that's a tongue twister. I'm going to add it into my roster for my clients. If you get tongue tied, say special secret sauce.
There you go.
It's very individual, but here are the questions you should ask yourself and I think asking the right questions is maybe the most important thing, because you mentioned, you're like, my goals might be different than the goals of someone who's trying to sell a book right now.
Mhm.
So you want to think about, if you're interested in doing more public speaking and having more visibility in your business, who is the audience I want to get in front of? I think is the first question, because there's opportunities out there. There's podcasts, there's Facebook Lives, there's speaking events, but I think getting really focused on where is my audience so that you're speaking in the right rooms. Though if you're really nervous and you're just like, I need some reps, speak in every room just to get some practice. But I think if you have a specific goal in mind, think of, who is the audience I want to reach? What rooms are they hanging out in? How can I get into one of those rooms? And once you've answered those questions, the nitty gritty how to, it probably has something to do with creating a speaker sheet so that you have a talk that you could submit different places. It might be creating a speaker reel. It might be partnering up with other folks in your industry and doing joint webinars. It's really going to be different depending on your goal. But the first question to ask are, what audience am I trying to get in front of? Where are they hanging out? How do I get in front of them?
And you made me think, once they get on that stage, is there a editing process, so to speak, on that story that they're telling? Is there, is maybe the first time your rough draft, and, just to liken this to writing a book, how, like in your process, have you ever revised, like, okay, this is my story arc, this is what I'm going to share, and then you go on stage and you kind of see the response and you're like, that didn't really work, or
Yeah, absolutely. You do want to crowd test things. I will say it's harder in the virtual world because you're not getting the same sort of live in the room feedback that you would if you were in an auditorium with 500 people and you go, oh, that joke landed, that didn't. That's when everybody got their phones out. You don't have quite the same feedback over Zoom if you're doing virtual talks, which I do the majority of my speaking online these days. But I would say I do change things up, workshop to workshop, talk to talk. And the way I do that is I talk to the event organizer beforehand and I ask, what are folks particularly interested in? What are they struggling with? What do they need to hear? So the bones of my presentations are usually the same, but then I'll pepper in content that's really specific to the audience. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, but the more you know about your audience and what their concerns are or what they're really excited to hear, the more that you can have a unique experience with them in the room, virtual or otherwise.
And I love that because I also think it's tied to, hopefully the author has already done some market research on who their audience is, what kind of, if they read fiction books like that they've written, what are they responding to? And I feel like really knowing who you're talking to, who your audience is, like you said, and you can really streamline what you're going to say and maybe tweak along the way, which is great, depending on who specifically you're getting in front of.
Yeah.
So I think, one more question for you. This might be a silly one, but if you had a checklist of what qualities makes a good public speaker, so if in your mind's eye, you have some of your favorite actors or public speakers, like what qualities do you think make them great? And again, this could be a subjective kind of answer, but so feel free to make it subjective, or you can go the other way where it's like objectively, this is what makes a good public speaker. So I just wanted to throw that out there. If we had a checklist of what homework we should go work on.
I love that. Okay. Well, the first thing, this isn't going to be so checklisty, but I will give you some of the things that I look for when I go, oh, that's a really powerful public speaker. The first thing is they're not imitating anyone else. I find that sometimes folks try to fit themselves in a box of like, if I'm going to be a motivational speaker, I'm going to be Tony Robbins. And you don't have to be. He's already doing that. You can be you. So I always find that really refreshing when I see someone on stage and they're allowing their own idiosyncrasies. They sound like how they would sound off stage. That idea of they're not trying to fit into someone else's box. And I think people really respond to that is, oh, this is Amanda. This isn't Amanda trying to be Meryl Streep. Though I would also love to see that, Amanda, if you would like to do a biopic. So I think that's the first thing that I think really stands out is when someone seems really confident in their own skin and they're not trying to be someone else. Mm-hmm. I would say the best public speakers across the board, and I think writers as well, are really good listeners. And this also speaks to that thing of like, who's your audience? What are they looking for? If you can listen really well, and again, improv classes help with that tremendously. Speaking is maybe 30% speaking and 70% being a good listener. You'll also see this, the number one tell for this is at a Q&A, which people really dread a Q&A sometimes after you've done your presentation and the audience asks you questions. I always am really impressed when I see speakers where they're actually listening to the question, they're taking it in, they're willing to ask clarifying questions if they don't understand, and they answer the question they're asked and not the bullet points that they wanted to answer, if that makes any sense.
The political, like the
yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
I just asked you about healthcare and somehow you answered about Social Security. Yes. Because that's what they pivoted to. So the ability to listen and respond to what's actually being asked, that's the difference between someone who can really, really prepare and someone who can breathe and listen on the spot and respond. That to me is always the sign of an advanced public speaker. Mm-hmm. And then all of the other ones are very subjective of, I personally love someone who isn't afraid to add some musicality to their speech, someone who really chews up their words so that we can have a picture in our mind's eye, but that's more subjective. Like you could be Ben Stein in Ferris Bueller's Day Off and give us the monotone, and that works for some people, but I have a bias towards folks who are willing to really chew up those words. I find that really powerful when people are willing to add musicality to their voice and use their voice as an instrument, not just as a vehicle for these lovely words that they've crafted, but they actually pay attention to the delivery as well.
Right. And because tone is, I think, I don't know how much, but it's a huge percentage of how we interpret what somebody's saying, right? So the tone in which you say it is so important. I just wanted to also comment on that on your first bullet point, there was, about just being yourself, and almost like, I think that's just so empowering because And in a way, right, it's like to take it to a professional level, I think knowing yourself and then how can I package myself a little bit more to get on a stage, right? And it's almost like putting salt on yourself, right? Like just like elevating
Oh,
it.
I love that.
I
Putting
know.
salt on yourself. What I usually ask people is, what do you want more of in your public speaking? Because I don't think there's one right way to do it. If you're connecting with your audience, you can do that talking fast and being bubbly. You could have it be very like somber and direct. Those are all effective ways of public speaking. I ask folks, what do you want more of? Which I love this putting some salt on. I'm like, do you want more cayenne? Do you want more salt? Maybe you want a little bit of cinnamon in your public speaking. What are you going for? Or when people say like, I want to sound like a leader, the first question I ask is, great, what does a leader sound like to you?
I love that.
People lead a variety of ways.
Nice.
So I might just steal that seasoning metaphor because that's pretty lovely. And I'm always on the lookout for a turn of phrase.
Yeah.
How would you like to season yourself as a public speaker?
I love that. Oh my God, Sarah, this has been a pleasure. I know you said there was something you're going to give away and then also just how can we reach you if we need to get in touch with you?
Wonderful. Yeah, you can find me at speakmasterfully.com. That is my company. Email me at Sarah@speakmasterfully. I'm at all the socials at speakmasterfully. And I also will throw that public speaking guide in the comments for anyone who would like a little help with that outlining process as they bravely take the stage. But Amanda, this has been such a joy. Thank you for having me. I am delighted to speak with you, and we need to do more of this offline as well.
We really got so much value out of today and a lot of tips and tricks, and I love it. As somebody who's again, honestly an introvert, I would say that, I'm really looking forward to really putting the speaking skills to practice and getting better. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda.
Great. We'll be in touch. Have a good one.